In 1960, the average American woman weighed 140 pounds. In 2024, that number is 171, same genetics, same biology, same country, 31 pounds heavier. And the American diet industry, worth $90 billion, has spent 60 years telling you the reason is willpower. It is not willpower. Here is what actually changed. The real question, the women of 1960 were not on diets, not counting calories, not tracking macros, not intermittent fasting, not doing anything that the modern wellness industry would recognize as intentional health behavior. They were thin because the food environment around them had not yet been engineered to make them fat. That is the sentence that changes everything. For 60 years, the conversation about weight in America has been a conversation about personal responsibility, about discipline, about individual choices. But the right question has never been, why don't modern Americans have more willpower? The right question is, what changed between 1960 and now that made willpower necessary in the first place? Here is what changed, habit by habit, industry by industry. In 1960, there were fewer than 500 diet-related products on the American market. Today, there are over 50,000. The industry selling you the solution grew by 10,000%, while the problem it claims to solve got worse every single decade. That is not a coincidence. That is a business model. They didn't snack the kitchen. In a 1960 American household had a rule so simple it was never stated as a rule. You ate at meal times. Between meals, the kitchen was not where you went. Hunger between meals was not a problem to be solved. It was simply the body's signal that the next meal was approaching. In 1960, the American snack food industry barely existed. Doritos launched in 1966, Pringles in 1968. Before them, there was no category, no shelf in the grocery store, no cultural script that said hunger between meals required an immediate edible response. That script was written deliberately by companies who first created the behavior and then sold the product to fill it. The snack food industry is now worth $18 billion. The women of 1960 ate 3 times a day. That structure produced a relationship with hunger that the modern food environment has made nearly impossible to maintain. Not because humans changed, because the market changed around them. Breakfast was real food, 1959. American breakfast was 2 eggs, toast, and coffee. It held until noon, not because of nutritional strategy, but because whole food protein is structurally filling. Research published decades later confirmed what the 1960 kitchen already knew. Eggs produce a significantly greater satiety response than processed breakfast alternatives. The breakfast-on-the-go market now generates $35 billion annually. The product it replaced cost 20 cents of eggs and butter and could not be monetized. You cannot put a logo on a fried egg. You cannot build a subscription model around it, so the industry built a replacement. The replacement is less filling, more expensive, and comes in a wrapper. The women who ate eggs in 1960 were not thinking about protein. They were thinking about getting the kids to school. The eggs did the rest. In 1972, the US government began subsidizing corn production at scale. By 1980, high fructose corn syrup was cheaper than sugar. By 1984, it had been quietly inserted into the American food supply. Bread, pasta sauce, ketchup, peanut butter, salad dressing, without consumer awareness and without any vote being taken. The average American now consumes 57 pounds of added sugar per year. In 1960, that number was 23 pounds. The extra 34 pounds did not come from the sugar bowl on the kitchen table. It came from the products where nobody agreed to put it. The plates were smaller. The dinner plates in a 1960 American household measured 9 inches across. The standard modern dinner plate is 12 inches. 3 additional inches of diameter means roughly 50% more surface area. Behavioral nutrition research has consistently documented what happens. People eat more when more is served, independent of actual hunger. The plate is what the brain reads before the stomach gets a vote. Nobody changed the plate size for health reasons. Restaurants found that larger plates allowed larger portions. Larger portions allowed higher prices. The plate grew because growing the plate was profitable. A full 9-inch plate communicates completion. A full 12-inch plate requires more food to say the same thing. The women of 1960 finished dinner without feeling deprived. Their plates were full. The plates were just smaller. They drank water in 1960. What Americans drank was water, milk, and black coffee. Soda existed in a 6.5-ounce bottle, one size, available occasionally. The standard Coca-Cola bottle today is 20 ounces. The smallest bottle they sell is 12. The global beverage industry, soft drinks, energy drinks, sweetened coffees, flavored waters, is now worth over $300 billion. Every dollar of that was created by replacing something that either cost nothing or arrived in a glass bottle to your door. Water cannot be trademarked. Milk cannot support a $300 billion industry. Something else had to be invented. It was invented, and then it was made normal, and then it was made necessary. The women of 1960 drank water not as a health choice. Water was simply what you drank. The alternative did not yet exist. In 1977, the United States government published dietary guidelines recommending Americans reduce fat intake. The food industry's response was not to improve the food. It was to replace fat with sugar, because fat carries flavor, and something had to fill the gap. The low-fat product category was born. Fat-free cookies, skim milk, margarine instead of butter. Within 15 years of those guidelines, American obesity rates began climbing a line they have not left since. The women who were thin in 1955 were eating butter, lard, whole milk, and cream at every single meal of their adult lives. The generation that replaced it with low-fat processed alternatives did not get thinner. The industry that sold them the substitutes is now worth $250 billion. The butter was not the problem. The butter was never the problem. They moved without calling it exercise in 1960. The American fitness industry did not exist. The women who were thin had no gym memberships, no step counters, no workout schedules. What they had was a domestic economy that required continuous physical movement. Groceries walked home, laundry carried up and down stairs, meals that took 2 hours of standing to prepare, a neighborhood that was a destination rather than a backdrop. Physiologists call this non-exercise activity thermogenesis, the calories burned through ordinary daily movement. Research shows variance between individuals can reach 2,000 calories per day depending on how much they move through normal life. The fitness industry is worth $35 billion. It sells, at a monthly fee, a partial replacement for the movement that the 1960 kitchen and neighborhood provided for free. She didn't have a gym. She had places to be. They cooked from scratch. The pantry of a 1960 American kitchen held flour, butter, eggs, potatoes, and whatever was in season. These required preparation. And that preparation was, without anyone planning it, a form of protection. When you make food from scratch, the ingredients are the ones you chose. There is no high fructose corn syrup in the pot roast because you did not put it there. The food is less calorie dense because it has not been engineered to be more appealing than it naturally is. Research consistently shows that people who cook most of their meals at home consume meaningfully fewer calories, not from effort, but because home-cooked food is structurally less calorie-dense than its commercial equivalent. The bread in a 1955 kitchen had 4 ingredients: flour, water, yeast, salt. A leading commercial bread today lists more than 30. The extra 26 are not for your benefit. What actually changed? When I look at the timeline of what happened between 1960 and today, one thing becomes clear. None of the habits that kept women thin in 1960 required discipline in the way we have been taught to think about discipline. None required a product. None required a subscription. None required counting anything. What they required was a food environment that had not yet been organized around manufacturing hunger and selling the solution. The snack industry manufactured the need for snacking and sold the snack. The beverage industry manufactured the need for caloric drinks and sold the drinks. The low-fat industry was handed a government guideline and used it to manufacture a product category that made people heavier and sold them the next product to manage it. The discipline gap is real. But the reason it exists is that we are fighting a system specifically designed to make discipline fail, and then selling us the products we need to almost manage. The women of 1960 did not win a fight against that system. They lived before the fight was manufactured. More number before we finish. In 1960, Americans spent approximately 27% of their food budget on eating at home, cooking, ingredients, real food. Today, Americans spend more on food away from home than on groceries for the first time in history. That shift, from kitchen to product, from ingredient to package, from cooking to purchasing, is the entire story. It is not about willpower. It is about who got paid when the kitchen stopped being enough. Subscribe to Back in Time and tell me, which one of these habits are you going to bring back in time?